The massive warship Voidhammer floated in the dark space between stars. Inside its command deck, 12 different alien species sat around a circular table. Their eyes glowed with different colors: red, blue, green, and purple. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few looked like walking insects. But they all shared one thing: they were here to plan a war. Admiral Kexthar stood at the head of the table. His gray skin bore scars from 100 battles. His forearms moved as he spoke, pointing at the holographic display above them. The display showed a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. "This is Earth," Kexthar said. His voice was deep and harsh. "Home to a primitive species called humans. They have recently learned to travel between stars, but their technology is still crude. Our scouts report they use simple kinetic weapons and basic energy shields." Commander Vexnil, a tall being with purple skin and 6 eyes, leaned forward. "How many ships do they have?" "Less than 50 in their entire fleet," Kexthar replied. "Most are converted cargo vessels. They pose no real threat to our forces." The other commanders looked pleased. General Zarketh, whose insect-like head clicked as he spoke, asked, "What resources does this world offer?" Kexthar smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Vast deposits of rare minerals, clean water covering most of the surface, and a perfect atmosphere for most of our species. This world will make an excellent addition to our territory." "What about the humans themselves?" asked Captain Mordun, her scaled hands tapping on the table. 7 billion of them," Kexthar said. "They will make useful slaves once we break their will. Humans are known for their ability to adapt and work in difficult conditions." The assembled commanders nodded in agreement. The Zephyrian Collective had conquered 47 worlds in the past century. Each conquest had followed the same pattern. They would arrive with overwhelming force, demand surrender, and crush any resistance within days. Most species surrendered immediately when they saw the size of the collective fleet. "The humans have been expanding into our territory," Kexthar continued. "They have established colonies on 12 worlds that we had marked for future conquest. Their trade routes now interfere with our supply lines. This cannot continue." "How long until we reach their system?" asked Commander Yextar. 72 hours, Kexthar replied. "I have assembled our largest fleet for this operation. 500 ships of various classes, 3 dreadnoughts, 50 heavy cruisers, and over 400 support vessels. The humans will see our force and surrender before we fire a single shot." The commanders laughed. It was a sound that would have terrified any human who heard it. These beings had destroyed entire civilizations. To them, humans were just another primitive species standing in the way of progress. Far from the collective fleet, on a small trading station near the edge of human space, an alien named Veltar paced nervously in his cramped quarters. Unlike the warriors of the collective, Veltar was a merchant. He had no love for war or conquest. He traded in rare goods and information, traveling between different species and making a modest living. Veltar had overheard the collective's plans while delivering supplies to one of their outposts. The casual way they discussed the destruction of Earth had made his blood run cold. He had traded with humans before. They were fair in their dealings and treated him with respect. Unlike the collective, who saw him as little more than a useful tool, he activated his communication system and sent an encrypted message toward Earth. He knew the humans had listening posts throughout their territory. Someone would receive his warning. On Earth's moon, Commander Jake Morrison was reviewing patrol reports when the message arrived. Luna Base served as humanity's first line of defense and early warning system. Morrison had been expecting trouble. Human expansion had been rapid in recent years, and they had encountered several hostile species. Morrison was a tall man with short brown hair and tired eyes. He had spent 15 years in the Earth Defense Force, working his way up from a fighter pilot to base commander. He had seen action in 3 different conflicts with alien raiders, but nothing like what Veltar was describing. The message was short, but terrifying. A massive fleet was heading toward Earth. 500 ships under the command of the Zephyrian Collective. Morrison had heard stories about the collective. They were ruthless conquerors who showed no mercy to the species they defeated. Morrison immediately contacted Earth. President Lisa Carter answered the emergency communication from her office in Washington. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair who had led Earth through its first years of interstellar expansion. She listened quietly as Morrison read Veltar's message. "How reliable is this source?" Carter asked. "I've dealt with Veltar before," Morrison replied. "He's always been honest in his trading. I don't think he would lie about something this serious." Carter nodded. "Contact Defense Secretary Alex Reed. I want all senior staff in the Situation Room within the hour." While Morrison sent out the emergency alerts, deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon, Dr. Katie Sullivan was working in her laboratory. She was a small woman with red hair tied back in a ponytail. Her lab coat was stained with grease and chemical, residue from months of non-stop work. Sullivan had been leading Project Prometheus for 3 years. It was humanity's most classified defense program. Even most government officials didn't know it existed. The project had consumed enormous resources and required breakthrough discoveries in physics that most scientists thought were impossible. Her colleague, Dr. Ben Torres, looked up from his computer screen. He was a heavy-set man with a thick beard, who specialized in energy systems. "Katie, we're getting reports of an incoming alien fleet. 500 ships." Sullivan's hands stopped moving. She had been adjusting a complex piece of equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. "How long do we have?" 72 hours, maybe less. Sullivan closed her eyes and took a deep breath. 3 years of work. And they still weren't sure if their system would function under real combat conditions. They had run simulations and small-scale tests, but nothing could prepare them for what was coming. "Is the grid ready?" she asked. Torres checked his readings. "The power systems are stable, but we haven't tested the full activation sequence. If something goes wrong, we could lose everything. If we don't try, we'll lose everything anyway," Sullivan replied. She opened her eyes and looked at the massive device that filled most of the underground chamber. It looked like a fusion of human engineering and something else, something that didn't quite fit with human technology. On the surface, Commander, Morrison received confirmation that Earth's leadership was assembling. Long-range sensors were beginning to detect unusual energy signatures at the edge of the solar system. The enemy fleet was coming, and humanity was about to face its greatest test. Time was running out. The Zephyrian fleet moved through the solar system like a plague of metal locusts. Their massive ships cast shadows across the asteroid belt as they destroyed everything in their path. Mining stations exploded in bright flashes. Automated defense platforms fired their weapons uselessly before being torn apart by alien plasma cannons. Admiral Kexithar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the destruction with satisfaction. His forearms worked the control panels as he directed the assault. The humans had built impressive infrastructure throughout their solar system, but it was no match for collective firepower. "Sir," reported his communications officer, "we are detecting multiple human vessels retreating toward their homeworld. They appear to be civilian craft." Kexthar nodded. This was expected. Every species ran when they saw the true power of the collective. Soon the humans would realize that resistance was pointless. "Open a channel to Earth," he commanded. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of an Earth government building. President Lisa Carter sat behind a large desk, flanked by military officers in blue uniforms. She was a calm-looking woman with steel in her eyes. Kexithar smiled his predator's smile. "I am Admiral Kexthar of the Zephyrian Collective. Your species has violated our territorial claims and interfered with our expansion. You will surrender immediately and prepare for occupation. Comply, and your deaths will be quick." Carter leaned forward slightly. Her voice was steady and clear. "I am President Carter of the United Earth Government. We have received your message and considered your demands." She paused for a moment. "We decline your offer. Earth will defend itself." The alien commanders on Kexthar's bridge looked at each other in surprise. In 300 years of conquest, no primitive species had ever refused to surrender when faced with collective might. Kexthar laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bridge. You do not understand the situation, human. We have 500 warships. You have fewer than 50 outdated vessels. Surrender now or watch your world burn. The answer is still no, Carter replied calmly. Kexthar's smile faded. His red eyes glowed with anger. Very well. You have chosen extinction. He cut the communication and turned to his weapons officer. Target their largest moon colony, Luna City. Destroy it completely. Let them see what resistance costs. Luna City was home to 2 million humans. It was built inside massive domes that protected the inhabitants from the vacuum of space. The city sparkled with lights that could be seen from Earth, a symbol of human achievement and expansion. Kexthar's fleet launched a coordinated barrage. 50 plasma torpedoes raced toward the moon, each one capable of destroying an entire city block. The weapons moved at incredible speed, trailing fire as they approached their target. On Luna Base, Commander Jake Morrison watched the incoming attack on his screens. He had evacuated as many civilians as possible, but millions of people were still in the city. His hands clenched into fists as he waited for the inevitable destruction. The plasma torpedoes struck an invisible barrier 50 kilometers above Luna City. Instead of destroying the settlement, the weapons simply vanished. Their energy was absorbed and redirected harmlessly into space. The city's lights continued to shine as if nothing had happened. On the collective flagship, the weapons officer stared at his readings in confusion. Sir, all torpedoes were neutralized. Some kind of energy barrier protected the target. Kexthar's 4 eyes narrowed. Impossible. Our intelligence reports indicated no such defensive capabilities. Deep beneath Luna City, Dr. Katie Sullivan watched her control panels with relief. The defensive grid was working. 3 years of research and development had paid off. The barrier system could absorb and redirect energy attacks using principles that most alien species had never discovered. Her colleague, Dr. Ben Torres, wiped sweat from his forehead. The power drain was enormous, but the system held. We can probably absorb a few more attacks before we need to recharge. Sullivan nodded, but her expression remained tense. This was just their first test. They'll try something different next. Time. In Earth's orbital shipyards, Commander Morrison prepared his small fleet for battle. The Earth Defense Force had only 47 combat vessels, most of them converted from civilian designs. Against 500 alien warships, it seemed like suicide. Morrison's flagship was the Enterprise, a sleek vessel that looked primitive compared to the massive collective dreadnoughts. But appearances could be deceiving. Morrison had been involved in the ship's design, and he knew capabilities that weren't visible from the outside. All ships, this is Morrison, he broadcast to his fleet. We're going to hit their forward scouts and then withdraw. Make every shot count. The human ships accelerated toward the alien vanguard. 20 collective destroyers moved to intercept them, confident in their superiority. The alien vessels were 3 times larger than the human ships and heavily armed. The engagement began at long range. Collective plasma cannons fired streams of superheated gas at the approaching humans. But the human ships began moving in ways that seemed to defy physics. They twisted and turned through space, dodging attacks that should have been impossible to avoid. Morrison's tactical officer, Lieutenant Amy Foster, worked her controls with intense concentration. Gravity manipulation systems are operating at our maximum efficiency. We're pulling 6G turns that would kill us without the compensators. The Enterprise dove between 2 alien destroyers, its weapons firing constantly. Instead of the kinetic projectiles the collective expected, the human ship launched quantum torpedoes that phased through enemy shields before exploding inside their hulls. 3 collective destroyers died in the first 30 seconds of combat. Their hulls split open, venting atmosphere and debris into space. The remaining aliens tried to respond, but the human ships had already vanished. Morrison activated his ship's stealth field, rendering the Enterprise invisible to most sensors. The other human vessels did the same, disappearing from alien detection systems. Within moments, the entire human fleet had vanished as if it had never existed. Commander Vexenil, leading the collective's forward elements, stared at his empty, tactical display. His 6 eyes blinked in confusion. Where did they go? His sensor operator worked frantically at her station. I don't know, sir. They just disappeared. Our sensors can't track them. Kexthar received the report with growing anger and confusion. In his centuries of warfare, he had never encountered technology like this. Humans were supposed to be primitive. Their weapons were supposed to be crude kinetic projectiles and basic energy beams. How did they destroy 3 of our ships? He demanded. Bexnil's voice came through the communication system. Their weapons phased through our shields somehow, and their ships moved faster than our targeting systems could track. Kexthar's grip tightened on his command chair. The humans had drawn first blood in a battle that should have been a massacre. For the first time in his military career, he began to doubt the intelligence reports about their enemy. On Earth, President Carter received Morrison's battle report in the Situation Room. Defense Secretary Alex Reed looked pleased with the initial results, but Carter remained cautious. This was just a probe, she said. They'll come at us with everything they have next time. General Paul Martinez, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, nodded grimly. Our ships performed better than expected, but we can't keep trading losses at this rate. We need to activate the other systems. Carter looked at the tactical display showing the approaching alien fleet. Hundreds of red dots moved steadily toward Earth, while only a few dozen blue dots represented humanity's defenders. Contact Dr. Sullivan, Carter ordered. Tell her to prepare for full activation of Project Prometheus. It's time to show these aliens what humans are really capable of. In space, the collective fleet regrouped and continued its advance. But something had changed. The easy conquest they had expected was turning into something else entirely. Admiral Kexthar began to suspect that the humans were not the primitive species his scouts had described. The real battle was about to begin. Admiral Kexthar had seen enough. The human ships had humiliated his forward scouts, but now he would show them the true power of the collective. He ordered his entire fleet to advance on Earth, keeping his ships in tight formation to prevent another surprise attack. Begin orbital bombardment, he commanded. Target every major population center on the planet. I want those cities reduced to ash within the hour. The massive collective fleet opened fire with everything they had. Thousands of plasma cannons sent streams of superheated energy toward Earth's surface. The barrage was enough to crack a planet's crust and boil away its oceans. It was the kind of attack that had ended dozens of civilizations. But as the plasma beams approached Earth, something impossible happened. Massive energy shields flickered into existence above every human city. The shields were so large they could be seen from space, glowing domes of blue light that covered entire metropolitan areas. The plasma bombardment struck the shields and simply vanished. The energy was absorbed without any visible effect on the protective barriers. New York continued to function normally beneath its shield. London's lights still twinkled in the darkness. Tokyo showed no signs of damage despite being hit by enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Kexthar stared at his tactical display in disbelief. How is this possible? No primitive species has defensive technology of this magnitude. His science officer, a creature with tentacles instead of arms, worked frantically at her station. Sir, the energy signatures don't match any known technology. These shields are operating on principles we don't understand. On Earth's surface in the underground laboratory beneath Luna City, Dr. Katie Sullivan watched her control systems with satisfaction. The planetary defense grid was working perfectly. Every major city on Earth was protected by shields that could absorb tremendous amounts of energy. Dr. Ben Torres looked up from his monitors, sweat beading on his forehead. Katie, the power consumption is incredible. How are we maintaining this level of protection? Sullivan turned to face him, her expression serious. Ben, it's time you knew the truth about Project Prometheus. The technology we're using isn't entirely human. Torres stared at her in confusion. What do you mean? Sullivan walked over to a sealed section of the laboratory that Torres had never been allowed to enter. She placed her hand on a scanner, and the doors slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was equipment that looked nothing like human technology. The surfaces were smooth and curved, made from materials that seemed to glow with their own inner light. This technology was here when we arrived, Sullivan explained. Hidden beneath the lunar surface, waiting for us to discover it. Our ancestors left it for us along with instructions on how to activate it when we were ready. Torres stepped into the chamber, his eyes wide with amazement. Our ancestors? Katie, what are you talking about? Sullivan touched one of the alien. Devices and holographic displays came to life around them. The displays showed star charts, technical diagrams, and what appeared to be historical records. Humanity didn't evolve on Earth, Ben. We came here thousands of years ago, refugees from a war that destroyed our original civilization. Earth was meant to be our fresh start, but our ancestors knew that someday we might face threats again. Above, Earth's atmosphere, the battle was taking a dramatic turn. Captain Ryan Stewart led a squadron of human fighters that moved through space like deadly dancers. Stewart was a young man with quick reflexes and nerves of steel, enhanced by neural interfaces that connected his mind directly to his ship's systems. The human fighters seemed to anticipate every alien move. They twisted between plasma blasts and torpedo salvos, striking back with weapons that the collective couldn't understand or defend against. Stewart's fighter launched a quantum torpedo that phased through a collective cruiser's shields and exploded inside its engine room. How are they doing this? Demanded Commander Vexnil as he watched another of his ships die. Their pilots are reacting faster than our targeting computers can track them. What Vexnil didn't know was that the human pilots weren't entirely human anymore. The neural interfaces allowed them to process information and react at superhuman speeds. They could see the battle unfolding in slow motion while their enhanced reflexes kept them alive. The collective fleet began to panic. Ships that had conquered dozens of worlds were being destroyed by fighters a fraction of their size. Admiral Kexthar ordered a retreat, but as his ships tried to activate their hyperspace engines, nothing happened. Sir, hyperspace systems are not responding, reported his navigation officer. Something is blocking our jump capabilities. Deep inside several collective ships, figures moved through darkened corridors. They wore human clothing but carried advanced weapons and equipment. These were deep-cover agents who had been placed aboard alien vessels weeks ago, disguised as captured humans or rescued prisoners. Agent Maria Santos was one of these infiltrators. She was a small woman with dark hair and cold eyes, trained in covert operations and enhanced with cybernetic implants that made her faster and stronger than any normal human. She had spent 3 weeks aboard the collective dreadnought Bone Crusher, pretending to be a terrified prisoner while secretly sabotaging critical systems. Now she moved through the ship's engineering section with deadly purpose. Her cybernetic implants allowed her to interface directly with alien computer systems, turning the ship's own security measures against its crew. Blast doors sealed automatically, trapping collective soldiers in their quarters while Santos and her team disabled the hyperspace engines. Similar scenes were playing out across the collective fleet. Human agents revealed themselves throughout the enemy armada, systematically destroying navigation systems, weapons controls, and communication arrays. The collective had unknowingly carried their own destruction aboard their ships. On the surface of Earth, massive launch platforms rose from hidden bunkers. These weren't defensive positions but launching sites for invasion forces. Colonel Steve Parker stood on the command deck of one such facility, watching as thousands of human soldiers prepared for deployment. Parker was a veteran of multiple alien conflicts, a tall man with graying hair and scars that told stories of battles fought in distant star systems. He had been preparing for this moment for years, training elite forces for combat against technologically superior opponents. All units, prepare for launch, Parker announced through his communication system. Operation Hunter is now active. We're not just defending Earth today. We're going hunting. The launch platforms activated, sending streams of human soldiers and equipment toward the disabled collective ships. But these weren't desperate defenders trying to repel an invasion. They were predators moving to capture and dissect their prey. Kexthar watched in growing horror as human boarding parties attached to his ships throughout the fleet. These weren't the actions of a primitive species fighting for survival. This was the calculated response of an advanced civilization that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Sir, his communications officer reported. "We're receiving surrender demands from the human fleet." Kexithar couldn't believe what he was hearing. Surrender demands? From them? The main screen activated, showing Commander Morrison on the bridge of the Enterprise. The human officer looked calm and professional, nothing like the desperate defender Kexithar had expected to face. "Admiral Kexithar," Morrison said, "your fleet is disabled and surrounded. Your hyperspace capabilities have been eliminated and your ships are being boarded by our forces. I am offering you one chance to surrender peacefully. Comply, and your crews will be treated according to the laws of war. Resist and face the consequences." Kexithar's 4 hands trembled with rage and fear. In his long military career, he had never found himself on the receiving end of a surrender demand. The roles had been completely reversed. The hunters had become the hunted. As human soldiers secured collective ships throughout the fleet, it became clear that Earth's defense had been anything but desperate. This had been a carefully planned operation, executed with precision that spoke of long preparation and advanced intelligence. The collective had made a fatal error. They had attacked what they thought was a primitive world, only to discover they had awakened something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. The sleeping giant of Earth was fully awake now, and it was hungry. Admiral Kexithar tried desperately to contact Collective Command. His 4 hands worked the communication controls while his flagship shook under human boarding actions. But every frequency was filled with static. Every channel was dead. "Sir, all long-range communications are being jammed," his communications officer reported. Her voice shook with fear as explosions echoed through the ship's corridors. "We cannot reach any collective stations." What Kexithar didn't know was that human ships had been systematically destroying collective communication relays throughout the star sector for weeks. Earth's attack wasn't a desperate response to invasion. It was the final phase of a carefully planned operation that had been months in the making. On Earth, Admiral Susan Blake stood in the Pentagon's war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the entire galactic region. Blake was a stern woman with silver hair and eyes like ice. She had been planning this operation since the first reports of collective expansion reached Earth. "Phase 3 is complete," she announced to the assembled military leaders. "All enemy communication networks in sectors 7 through 12 have been eliminated. The collective leadership has no idea what's happening to their invasion fleet." General Paul Martinez nodded with satisfaction. "How long before they realize their fleet is missing?" "At least 2 weeks," Blake replied. "By then, it will be too late for them to respond." President Lisa Carter studied the tactical displays with interest. The plan she had approved months ago was working perfectly. "What about their reinforcements?" Blake smiled coldly. "There won't be any. We've been tracking their fleet movements for years. This invasion force represents 60% of their total military capability. Once we're finished here, the collective will be defenseless." Back in space, the human boarding actions continued, with brutal efficiency. Colonel Steve Parker led his elite soldiers through the corridors of the collective flagship. These weren't ordinary infantry troops. They were enhanced soldiers wearing powered armor that made them faster and stronger than any alien warrior. Parker kicked down a blast door and stepped into the ship's command center. Collective officers scattered in panic, but there was nowhere to run. Human soldiers had already secured all escape routes. "Attention collective personnel," Parker announced through his suit's speakers. "You are now prisoners of the Terran Federation. Comply with our instructions, and you will not be harmed." Admiral Kexithar stood at his command station, his red eyes burning with hatred. "You may have won this battle, human, but the collective will never surrender. We have conquered 47 worlds. We will not bow to a primitive species like yours." Parker removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face and cold blue eyes. "Primitive? Admiral, you have no idea what you're dealing with." He gestured to one of his soldiers who activated a portable holographic projector. The display showed star charts covering half the galaxy. Red dots marked collective territories, while blue dots showed human presence. But the pattern wasn't what Kexithar expected. The blue dots weren't clustered around Earth. They were scattered throughout collective space, often in locations the aliens thought were secure. Your people have been under surveillance for decades, Parker explained. Every military base, every supply depot, every communication relay. We know the location of your homeworlds, your industrial centers, your fleet positions. This invasion wasn't a surprise to us, Admiral. We've been waiting for it. Kexthar stared at the display in growing horror. Impossible. Our security is absolute. No alien species has ever penetrated our intelligence networks. Parker smiled grimly. You're right. No alien species has. But we're not aliens, are we? We're humans. And humans have a talent for getting into places where they don't belong. Throughout the collective fleet, similar scenes were playing out. Human soldiers captured alien officers with practiced efficiency. Advanced stun weapons and gravity nets made resistance impossible. The aliens found their own technology turned against them as human engineers demonstrated their ability to understand and control any system they encountered. Dr. Ben Torres worked frantically in his laboratory, studying captured collective equipment. The alien devices were sophisticated, but their technology followed predictable patterns. Within hours, Torres had figured out how to modify them for human use. Katie, look at this, he called to Dr. Sullivan. Their plasma weapons use a simple containment field to focus energy. If we reverse the polarity and increase the power output, we can create weapons that are twice as effective as their originals. Sullivan examined his work and nodded approvingly. Excellent. Send the specifications to all our engineering teams. I want every captured weapon upgraded and ready for use within 6 hours. On the surface of Earth, massive construction facilities began producing new equipment at an incredible rate. These facilities had been hidden underground for years, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Now they worked around the clock, turning captured alien technology into improved human weapons. The speed of human adaptation amazed even the most experienced collective officers. Weapons that had taken the aliens decades to develop were being improved by humans in a matter of hours. It was as if the human species had been designed specifically for technological warfare. Deep beneath the ocean, another surprise awaited the remaining collective forces. A massive structure rose from the seabed, breaking the surface with tremendous force. It looked like a small moon, but it was actually a weapons platform that had been disguised as an underwater research station. Dr. Katie Sullivan watched from her control room as the platform activated. Project Prometheus' final phase is now online, she announced. All defensive and offensive systems are operational. The platform's main weapon was unlike anything the collective had ever seen. It fired concentrated bursts of quantum energy that could phase through any known type of shielding. The first shot destroyed a collective heavy cruiser that had been trying to escape the solar system. The ship simply vanished, converted to energy, and scattered across space. Admiral Kexthar watched his remaining ships die one by one. The humans weren't just defending their world anymore. They were systematically destroying every collective vessel in the system, and they were doing it with technology that seemed impossible. Sir, his science officer reported, I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the human system. They have weapons platforms hidden everywhere, on their moon, in their asteroid belt, even orbiting their sun. Kexthar realized the terrible truth. Earth hadn't been a target of opportunity. It had been a trap. The humans had deliberately expanded into collective territory, knowing it would provoke an invasion. They had wanted the collective to attack, so they could destroy the invasion fleet completely. Agent Maria Santos completed her mission aboard the collective dreadnought. The ship's engines were disabled, its weapons offline, and its crew captured. But her real job was just beginning. Hidden in her equipment were recording devices that had captured every detail of collective technology and military procedures. Control. This is Santos, she reported through her communication implant. Intelligence package is complete. We now have full technical specifications for all collective ship classes, weapon systems, and defensive capabilities. The response came from Admiral Blake herself. Understood, Agent Santos. Prepare for Phase 4. Operation Hunter is now active. Throughout human space, massive fleets began emerging from hidden bases. These weren't the small defensive squadrons the collective had encountered. These were full battle fleets equipped with the most advanced technology humanity had ever created. The ships were sleek and deadly, incorporating lessons learned from decades of studying alien technology. They moved with purpose toward collective space, ready to begin the next phase of humanity's plan. President Carter stood in the Oval Office, looking out at the night sky. The first stars were becoming visible as the sun set behind the mountains. Somewhere among those stars, the collective was about to learn why no species survived an attack on Earth. "Madam President," her aide announced. "Admiral Blake reports that all objectives for Phase 3 have been achieved. The invasion fleet has been completely neutralized." Carter nodded slowly. "Signal all fleet commanders. Phase 4 is authorized. It's time to take the war to them." The sleeping giant wasn't just awake now, it was angry, and it was hungry for justice. 3 days after the failed invasion of Earth, massive human fleets emerged from hyperspace above collective worlds across the galaxy. The ships that appeared were unlike anything the aliens had seen before. They were larger than the vessels that had defended Earth, with smooth black hulls that seemed to absorb light itself. On the bridge of the flagship Retribution, Admiral Susan Blake watched as her fleet took position above the collective world of Nexus Prime. The planet below was a major industrial center with orbital shipyards that produced a quarter of the collective's military vessels. "All ships report ready for assault," her tactical officer announced. Commander Danny Wilson was a young man with sharp eyes who had been studying collective defensive patterns for years. Blake nodded coldly. "Begin Operation Hunter. Target all military installations first. Leave civilian areas intact for now." The human fleet opened fire with weapons that the collective had never encountered. Quantum torpedoes phased through the planet's shields as if they didn't exist. Gravity bombs collapsed entire military bases into twisted metal. The orbital shipyards that had taken decades to build were destroyed in minutes. The collective defenders tried to respond, but their weapons couldn't even target the human ships. Advanced stealth systems made the human fleet invisible to most sensors. When the aliens did manage to lock onto a target, their shots passed harmlessly through holographic projections. General Paul Martinez stood in the Pentagon War Room, coordinating attacks across 12 different star systems. Red lights on the tactical display showed collective worlds under assault. The plan he had developed over years of preparation was working perfectly. "Status report from all battle groups," he ordered. The reports came in rapidly. Admiral Connor Hayes reported that the collective fortress world of Iron Gate had fallen in less than 4 hours. Captain Laura Mitchell's task force had captured the alien research station at Deep Space 7 without firing a single shot. Colonel Tracy Adams announced that collective supply bases throughout the Outer Rim had been neutralized. "Resistance is minimal across all fronts," Martinez summarized for President Carter. The collective military was so dependent on the invasion fleet that they have almost no defensive capabilities left. Carter studied the reports with satisfaction. "What about civilian casualties?" "Nearly zero, Madam President. Our forces are using precision strikes against military targets only. We're not conquerors. We're liberators." On the collective homeworld of Zephyr, Overlord Zarketh paced frantically in his throne room. The massive alien leader had ruled the collective for over a century, crushing dozens of species beneath his iron fist. Now he was the one facing destruction. "Where is Admiral Kexthar?" he demanded of his advisors. "Why haven't we heard from the invasion fleet?" His intelligence chief, a thin creature with multiple eyes, trembled as he spoke. "My lord, we have lost contact with all forces in the Terra sector. Our communication relays throughout that region have gone silent." Zarketh's claws scraped against his throne. "Send reinforcements immediately. I want to know what happened to our fleet." "My lord," the intelligence chief said carefully, "we have no reinforcements to send. The invasion fleet contained most of our available ships. The forces that remain are needed to defend our core worlds." Before Zarketh could respond, alarms began wailing throughout the palace. Emergency lights bathed the throne room in red as his communications officer rushed in with a message tablet. "My lord, human ships have been detected entering our system. They will reach Zephyr in 6 hours. Zarketh stared at the officer in disbelief. "Human ships? Here? How is that possible?" On Earth, Dr. Katie Sullivan worked in her laboratory with teams of scientists from around the world. They were studying captured collective technology, and improving it at an incredible rate. Alien weapons that had taken generations to develop were being enhanced and mass-produced within days. "Ben, look at this," she called to Dr. Torres. "Their energy shields operate on a quantum frequency that we can disrupt with a simple modification to our existing weapons." Torres examined her work and grinned. "If we can mass-produce these disruptor devices, we can neutralize collective defenses on every world they control." Sullivan nodded. "Send the specifications to all our manufacturing centers. I want 1 million units ready within the week." The speed of human adaptation continued to amaze everyone involved in the operation. It was as if humanity had been designed specifically for this kind of warfare. Every piece of alien technology they encountered was quickly understood, improved, and turned against its creators. Commander Jake Morrison led a strike force toward the collective mining world of Crater 7. His ships moved through space like hunting wolves, silent and deadly. The mining operation on Crater 7 used slave labor from dozens of conquered species. Morrison's mission was to liberate those slaves and capture the mining equipment. "Sir, we're detecting automated defense systems around the planet," reported his tactical officer, Lieutenant Nancy Clark. Morrison smiled grimly. "Those defenses were designed to stop collective-level technology. They won't even slow us down." His ships launched a coordinated assault that lasted exactly 17 minutes. The automated defenses were destroyed so quickly that the planetary garrison had no time to respond. Human soldiers landed on the surface and began freeing thousands of enslaved aliens from dozens of different species. The freed slaves couldn't believe what they were seeing. Many of them had been prisoners for years, forced to work in dangerous mining operations. Now strange alien soldiers were cutting their chains and offering them food and medical care. "Who are you?" asked a leader of the enslaved Corvani people. His species had been conquered by the collective 20 years earlier. Morrison removed his helmet and smiled. "We're humans, and we're here to end the collective's reign of terror." Agent Maria Santos worked deep within collective space, coordinating with resistance movements on occupied worlds. Her cybernetic enhancements allowed her to blend in with the local population, while gathering intelligence and sabotaging collective operations. On the world of Broken Chain, she met with leaders of the Arcani resistance. The Arcani were a peaceful species that had been enslaved for over 50 years. Their resistance movement was small but determined. "The humans are real?" asked Commander Velkine, leader of the Arcani rebels. "We heard rumors of ships attacking collective bases, but we thought it was just wishful thinking." Santos showed him recordings of human victories across the galaxy. "It's real. The collective's invasion of Earth has triggered a war that will end their empire forever." Velkine watched the recordings with growing amazement. "How is this possible? The collective has never been defeated." "Because they made the mistake of attacking Earth," Santos replied. "And humans don't just defend themselves. When someone threatens our home, we make sure they can never threaten anyone again." Throughout collective space, similar scenes were playing out. Enslaved species were rising up against their oppressors, supported by human weapons and intelligence. Worlds that had been conquered decades earlier were throwing off their chains and joining the human alliance. The collective had spent centuries building an empire based on fear and oppression. But that empire was crumbling as fast as it had grown. Species that had never dreamed of freedom were suddenly fighting alongside human soldiers against their former masters. On Zephyr, Overlord Zarketh watched his empire die in real time. Reports flooded in from across collective space. Military bases destroyed. Supply lines cut. Entire worlds in rebellion. And always the humans were there, supporting the resistance movements and destroying collective forces. "How many ships do these humans have?" he demanded. His military advisor, General Techmore, looked at the tactical displays with confusion. "Unknown, my lord. They seem to have fleets everywhere at once. Either they have thousands of ships, or they're using technology. We don't understand." Zarketh realized the truth with growing horror. The humans hadn't just defended their world. They had been planning this campaign for years, maybe decades. The invasion of Earth had been a trap, designed to lure the collective fleet away from their home territories. "My lord," his communications officer announced, The human fleet has entered our system. They're requesting our surrender. Zarketh's rage boiled over. He had conquered 47 worlds. He had enslaved billions of beings. He would not surrender to a species he had never heard of until 3 days ago. Signal the human fleet, he ordered. Tell them that the collective will fight to the last ship. But even as he spoke the words, Zarketh knew it was already too late. The humans had won before the fighting even began. The only question now was how long the collective could delay the inevitable. 3 months after the failed attack on Earth, the Zephyrian collective no longer existed. Their homeworld of Zephyr lay in ruins, its military installations destroyed, and its leadership captured. Overlord Zarketh sat in a prison cell on Earth, awaiting trial for crimes against dozens of species. The war had lasted exactly 96 days. In that time, human forces had liberated 47 worlds, destroyed 300 collective military bases, and freed over 2 billion enslaved beings. The galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Susan Blake stood on the observation deck of her flagship, looking down at the rebuilt capital city of New Geneva on the former collective world of Nexus Prime. Where once alien overseers had ruled with iron fists, now representatives from dozens of species worked together to build a new government. Admiral, her aide Commander Danny Wilson announced, "President Carter is ready for the ceremony." Blake nodded and walked to the communication center. The main screen showed leaders from across the galaxy gathered in the great assembly hall that had been built where the collective's torture chambers once stood. Species that had been enemies for centuries now sat side by side, united by their shared experience of human liberation. President Lisa Carter stood at the podium, wearing the simple blue uniform of the Terran Federation. She was no longer just the leader of Earth. She had become the president of a galactic alliance that spanned hundreds of worlds. 3 months ago, the collective made a fatal mistake, Carter began. They attacked Earth thinking we were a primitive species that would surrender without a fight. They were wrong. The assembled delegates erupted in cheers. Former slaves who had spent decades in chains now served as the leaders of their rebuilt worlds. The Corvani representative, Commander Veltar, wept openly as he remembered his people's freedom. But this war was never about conquest, Carter continued. It was about justice. The collective ruled through fear and oppression for over 3 centuries. Today we ensure that such tyranny will never rise again. On Earth, Dr. Katie Sullivan worked in her laboratory with scientists from dozens of different species. The technology sharing program had accelerated scientific progress across the galaxy. Advances that would have taken centuries were being achieved in months. Dr. Ben Torres looked up from his workstation, where he was collaborating with a team of former collective scientists. "Katie, the Arcani researchers have found a way to improve our quantum shield technology by 30%. And the Villani engineers want to share their faster-than-light communication system." Sullivan smiled as she watched species that had once been mortal enemies working together. This is how the galaxy should have always been, Ben. Cooperation instead of conquest. The former collective species had been integrated into the Terran Federation, not as conquered peoples, but as equal partners. Those who had served the old regime were given chances to redeem themselves through service to the new order. Even former Admiral Kexthar, once he understood the true scope of collective crimes, had provided valuable intelligence to help locate hidden weapons caches and rescue remaining slaves. Commander Jake Morrison walked through the corridors of Luna Base, which had become the military headquarters for the entire galaxy. Officers from dozens of species worked alongside human personnel, planning defense strategies and coordinating exploration missions. Lieutenant Nancy Clark approached him with a data tablet. "Sir, we've received a message from the edge of the galaxy. Long-range sensors have detected ships from an unknown civilization approaching from the Andromeda sector." Morrison studied the report with interest. "How many ships?" "Approximately 200 vessels, sir. They appear to be conducting reconnaissance of our outer territories." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "Send them a diplomatic message. Invite them to establish contact through proper channels, and make sure they receive copies of the warnings we broadcast to all approaching civilizations." The warnings had become necessary after 3 other alien empires had attempted to test the new galactic order. Each had learned the same lesson the collective discovered. Attacking human territory was a fatal mistake. Agent Maria Santos worked as a cultural liaison officer on the former collective world of Broken Chain. The Arcani people had asked her to help them rebuild their civilization after 50 years of slavery. She walked through the reconstructed capital city, watching as former slaves learned to live as free beings again. Agent Santos called Commander Velkine, who now served as the planetary governor. "The memorial is ready for your inspection." Santos followed him to the center of the city, where a massive monument had been erected. It showed the symbols of all the species that had suffered under collective rule, with Earth's flag flying at the top. Below was a simple inscription in dozens of languages. "Never again." "It's perfect," Santos said softly. "The galaxy will remember what happened here, and why it must never happen again." In the depths of space near the edge of the galaxy, an alien fleet from the Andromeda sector studied the ruins of a collective outpost. The ships belonged to a species called the Hegemony, another empire built on conquest and slavery. Fleet Commander Torgash examined the wreckage with his senior officers. The outpost had been destroyed with weapons of incredible power. Every structure had been reduced to atoms, leaving only twisted metal and scattered debris. "What could have done this?" asked his science officer. Torgash was about to order an investigation when his communications officer intercepted a transmission. It was a message from the destroyed outpost, sent just before its destruction. The voice belonged to Admiral Kexithar of the Collective. "To any who receive this warning," the message said, "do not attack the Blue World, do not attack Earth, they are not what they seem. We thought we were hunting prey, but we were the prey. The humans are not just another species. They are the hunters, and we were never anything more than their game." The message continued with details of the Collective's complete destruction. 500 ships reduced to scrap metal. An empire that had lasted 3 centuries, destroyed in 3 months, all because they had made the mistake of attacking Earth. Torgash ordered his fleet to withdraw immediately. The Hegemony had conquered dozens of worlds, but they were not fools. They would find easier prey elsewhere in the galaxy. Back on Earth, President Carter stood in her office in the White House, looking out at a sky filled with ships from across the galaxy. Representatives, traders, and tourists from hundreds of worlds came to Earth daily, seeking to join the growing alliance. Her Chief of Staff, Secretary Amy Foster, entered with the daily reports. "Madam President, 12 more species have requested membership in the Federation. The Villani want to establish a permanent embassy, and the Corvani are offering to share their agricultural technology." Carter smiled as she watched a Arcani transport ship land at the spaceport. "How many worlds are now part of the Federation?" 237, Madam President, and growing every day." Carter nodded with satisfaction. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Earth was not a world to be conquered. It was a world that conquered others when necessary, liberated the oppressed, and built something better from the ashes of tyranny. In schools across the galaxy, children from dozens of species learned the story of the collective war. They learned how a single species had stood against an empire and won. More importantly, they learned why it had happened. The lesson was simple but profound. When you attack Earth, you don't just face humanity. You face everyone they have ever helped, everyone they have ever freed, and everyone who believes in the idea that freedom is worth fighting for. The galaxy was at peace now, protected by the most powerful military force it had ever known. But more than that, it was united by something the collective had never understood: hope. And somewhere in the depths of space, other empires received the warnings and chose to send diplomats instead of warships. They had learned from the collective's mistake. Now they understood why no species survives an attack on Earth.